The red circle was almost obscene against the white paper, a perfect 100, thick and deliberate, the ink still slightly wet. The camera of the mind lingers on it before it looks up and sees Miss Whitmore's face, the small crease between her brows, the blink that didn't reach her eyes. She held the paper like a contradiction she couldn't swallow. Amaya sat very still. Her hands were folded in her lap under the desk. Her breath was a slow, quiet count. At 17, she had learned how to make herself small and steadier than the room wanted her to be. She felt the eyes like weather, some warm, some cold, some the quick, curious glance of people who had watched her since middle school. Ethan leaned back, smirking. Claire glanced at her phone, already composing a joke. A few kids smiled the way you smile when you've picked a side without thinking too hard about why. "This isn't possible," Ms. Whitmore said, and the sentence landed like a hand on a table. It wasn't a question. Her voice came out of her mouth, shaped into certainty, before she had given it a shape that could be argued. "It's possible," Amaya said. Her voice sounded small to her, but it was even. She had practiced answering questions like this for years, calm, precise, no theatrics. There were entire nights that had been hours of whiteboard markers, late-night textbooks, and the dry scrape of pencil on practice problems. She knew each equation on that page, the way she knew the lines of herself. She'd worked for that 100. Miss Whitmore's lips thinned. "If you'll excuse me," she said, "we'll redo these problems now. You'll show the class. If you can't, then I'll be forced to report this." The words, report, redo, prove, landed like small stones thrown at a window. The room went hush. Two students laughed. One of them, Ethan, tried too hard, the sound breaking off. Claire's face tightened in real time, something like an instinct to side with the teacher whispering into the air. A girl in the second row put her head in her hands. Amaya could feel heat on her neck. Not shame exactly, not anger at first either. There was a thin line of incredulity. How could someone look at black handwriting, black skin, and decide right away that the work didn't belong? She had seen it in other teachers' eyes before, an assumption that talent was unusual when it came wrapped in her skin. She had learned to answer with method, not thunder. She stood. Her hand on the desk knocked a pencil over. It rolled and stopped against the edge of the radiator. "If you think there's been an error in grading," she said, "we can check the test. I'll walk you through the steps I used. There's nothing to hide." Ms. Whitmore turned the page over, as if the back might hide a confession. "No, not acceptable. You'll do the problems again, in front of everyone. This is standard procedure." She looked at Ethan and Claire the way a referee looks at favored players, an expectation of compliance. For a second, the idea of redoing problems in front of the class was almost laughable. Amaya could have solved them blindfolded. But this was not about math. It was about a ledger of prejudice, keeping score in a ledger that had always shown her as less than she was. To redo the problems would be to take the stage for a performance in which the referee had already decided the outcome. Amaya shook her head. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call out the obvious, that she had been called out like this before, that whiteness had sometimes bought people the benefit of doubt, that her name, her face, her focused hours had exhausted a currency no one had ever asked for. She said only, "I would prefer to speak with the principal. There's no reason for public spectacle when the paper is here." Miss Whitmore laughed at that laugh that teachers think masks exasperation. "You want the principal? Fine. I'll keep the test. I'll make a copy and file a report. There will be a record." Before Amaya could take back a single syllable, Ms. Whitmore gathered the tests with a brisk movement, and Amaya saw, in the same motion, how she folded Amaya's paper a little harder than the others. Her fingers pressed the corners, her thumb left tiny crescent marks. Then conspicuously, she crumpled it almost theatrically, as if destroying evidence would also erase the embarrassment of being proven wrong. The classroom reacted in a chorus of low exhalations. The sound of desks shifting, the rustle of sleeves. The teacher's motion had been small and decisive. The effect was big and deliberate. Amaya stepped forward, but she was already measured in her steps. "You can't," she began. "You'll do the problems again, now." Ms. Whitmore's words were fulcrum and gavel. "You'll show the class, or I'll mark it as invalid. You're lucky I'm even—" "If you report me, I will request a copy of the grading procedure," Amaya said. The words were not an ultimatum. They were more simply a fact. She had learned procedural language in a sea of personal attacks. She had learned that rules could be friends when justice felt rare. Ms. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You don't get to accuse me of bias." Amaya's mouth was dry, but her mind was oddly clear. "I didn't accuse you," she said. "I asked for a fair process." Someone in the back, soft voice, young, whispered, "This is messed up." It didn't change the room. After that, the day went into a kind of slow-motion disassembly. Ms. Whitmore asked Amaya to stay after class. Ethan and Claire traded looks that tried to be superior and failed. A couple of girls pretended to be bored, but watched like hawks. The bell came, students drifted out like water around a stone, and Ms. Whitmore remained because she wanted to be the last person to touch the paper that had undone her certainty. Amaya followed her into the hallway, because there are times when you are too tired to let dignity be taken away in private. Ms. Whitmore's lips were tight, her handbag hugged her shoulder like armor. "You will redo the problems," she said again, more quietly now, as if proximity might make a difference. "I will speak to the principal," Amaya said. "Now, if possible." "This is irrelevant," Ms. Whitmore cut in. "You can go see Principal Tate, but I'm the teacher here." That was when Ms. Rodriguez stepped into the frame, as if the building itself had decided on an intervention. She had the calm posture of someone whose job was to steady things that were already frayed. She looked at the two of them, then at Amaya, then at the folded paper in the teacher's hand. "Principal Tate will see you both in 5 minutes," she said. Her voice was plain and decisive. "There's been a complaint." She turned to the bulletin board and pinned a note. The office number of the principal in neat print, an administrative pivot. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the locker doors glinted as strangers with backpacks moved past, inconsequential. Amaya's heart thudded in a slow, patient rhythm. She wanted to storm, to shout, to make Whitmore feel the tremor she felt when a grade tried to swallow years of work. Instead, she wanted truth. She wanted the test preserved, not crumpled. She wanted the procedure followed. She wanted evidence to have a voice. The principal's office smelled faintly of coffee and lemon disinfectant. Principal Gregory Tate was a large man with small, careful gestures. His face was the kind you trusted to read straight down the middle of a problem and tell you what it was. He listened to Ms. Whitmore, a clipped, well-trained recitation, and then to Amaya's quiet retelling. He looked at the paper Ms. Whitmore handed over and hesitated, the way someone who keeps a ledger might hesitate to stamp a page without checking the date. "I'll need to see the camera footage from the hallway and the classroom," he said finally. "We have to clear this up now." Amaya felt something unexpected, a prickling lightness, like a trapped thing finding a seam. Ms. Rodriguez's face was steady. She reached under her desk and pressed a key sequence, her fingers moving with administrative familiarity. "We have footage," she said. "We review when complaints happen." The camera became an actor then, no longer imaginary, but a blunt, impartial instrument. They walked down the corridor toward the office, where security monitors hung like screens in a small war room. The monitor flickered to life. The footage was grainy in the way of things that aren't meant to be beautiful. It was accurate. It would be merciless because it caught what it caught. The first clip showed the classroom at the beginning of the period. Students settled. Ms. Whitmore walked the aisles, grading. Her hand hovered over a stack of papers. She flipped through more slowly with Amaya's. She made a facing remark, lips moving, voice low, and the closed captioning couldn't catch tone but could show the motion. a mouth forming a sentence in the space where a whispered judgment can live. The monitor jumped to a close-up of Ms. Whitmore's hands. She slid Amaya's test aside, then went back, paused, removed a pen from her pocket, circled a spot hard enough to dent the paper. For other students' tests, she marked lightly, even smiling in one frame as she shaded in a bubble with a gentler cadence. For Amaya's, the motions were sharper. At one point she crumpled the page, and the camera held the crumple like an admission. Then another clip. Ms. Whitmore in the hallway before class. She held Amaya's paper closer to her face, and the camera angle caught her muttering something under her breath. It was not the full sentence. The audio was thin. But her body leaned forward in a way that implied a private verdict. A camera angle from the teacher's lounge showed her tossing the paper into a desk drawer and closing it with a satisfied exhale. Principal Tate watched the footage with a face that tightened as the frames played. Ms. Rodriguez paused, rewound, checked the timestamp. The building hummed, regular and unconcerned, while the monitor told a different story. Pattern. Not just one small act, a habit. The footage had a secondary clip. Ms. Whitmore returning tests to other students and walking away, then returning to Amaya's stack with a different hand gesture. It was small, but in that smallness was intention. Amaya felt her breath go odd. Relief and outrage came in the same swell. There was a clarity she had hoped for and feared. Cameras were not miracles, but they were witnesses. Principal Tate spoke, slow and precise. "This suggests a pattern," he said. "We will put Ms. Whitmore on administrative leave while we investigate. We will preserve all records and will inform you of next steps." Ms. Whitmore's face moved through calculation. There was a flash of indignation, then a reflex to reclaim authority. "You cannot," she began. "You betrayed teaching," Principal Tate said. Not with glee, but with the bluntness of someone who has to steward a community. "We owe our students fairness. We will conduct a fair procedure, but for now you will not be in the classroom." The word suspension was precise. It landed heavy in the room. The hallway outside was suddenly more crowded, people ticking along schedules. Ms. Whitmore gathered her bag. She moved through the doors without looking back at Amaya. Her stride was a scene of professional self-possession gone brittle. Outside the office, Amaya slid down the wall and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. For a long second, she stared at the curve of the red 100 again in her head. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt like a person who had been given back a small part of the world that had nearly been taken. Word traveled faster than any memo. By lunch, the cafeteria was buzzing with the broadcasted story, teachers talking in quick tones, groups forming and reforming like eddies in a stream. Ethan saw the headlines on his phone and bristled, the angry way people bristle when their assumptions are challenged. He found Amaya by the big window that faced the quad. The light on her skin was a warm evenness. There was a new gravity to the way people looked at her, some respectful, some embarrassed, some curious. "You okay?" he asked, hands shoved into his hoodie. For a moment it seemed like an attempt at reconciliation, but then he tried a laugh that landed flat. Did you set her up?" Amaya looked at him. She didn't answer for a heartbeat. She had seen that kind of denial before, a fragile human reflex to protect the narrative that benefits you. "No," she said finally. "I did the work." Claire hovered nearby, phone in hand. Her expression was more complicated, as if she were attempting to navigate between the social advantage of siding with the teacher and the instinct not to be seen as cruel. She began, then stopped. Not everyone celebrated. There were murmurs that maybe the footage didn't tell the whole story, or that Ms. Whitmore had years of positive work. People liked to keep what they knew whole. But there were more people who opted for a quieter thing, listening. Teachers who'd seen the arc of Amaya's career, quiet, brilliant, steady, offered nods. A faculty member who had been in the building for decades came up and tapped Amaya's shoulder in a small, silent benediction. 2 days later, the principal called an assembly. He stood on the stage in the auditorium and looked at the students and faculty who filled the seats. He spoke with the measured cadence of someone who trusted language to hold fairness. He did not parade footage across the screen. He did not gloat. He told a story of standards, procedures, and trust. He told the room that the school could not tolerate bias in grading. He told them that the footage had revealed treatment of students inconsistent with school policy and that an investigation was underway. He said the school would put in place additional training and stronger oversight. Then a moment later, something unexpected. A letter from an outside academic foundation was read aloud. An organization focused on equitable scholarships had received notice of the incident from the district's academic affairs office and, impressed by Amaya's record, wanted to recognize her achievements. The principal invited Amaya to step forward. Her hands were steady as she walked. The auditorium clapped, first soft, then growing in warmth as classmates recognized that the applause was not just for vindication, but for persistent labor. Amaya received the scholarship not as trophy, but as an extension of possibility, tuition coverage, mentorship, and a summer research program at a local university. The principal explained how the organization had reviewed her grades, letters of recommendation, and standardized test scores. They had been moved by the fact that despite being doubted, she'd kept doing the work. "We can't erase what happened," he said, voice careful, "but we can ensure your next steps are supported." In the days that followed, the school became a place of small reckonings. Ms. Whitmore left the campus under the dull spotlight of process. Administrative rooms collected paperwork about investigations and prior complaints. The word suspension hung like fog. Her lawyer sent a request for records. The faculty staff room hosted conversations that were sometimes awkward and sometimes productive, about unconscious bias, training, and the systems by which teachers are evaluated. Amaya read about it all in the quiet between finals. Her phone buzzed until it warmed in her palm. Messages from older students at other schools, from a teacher who had once doubted her and now said they were sorry, from a college counselor offering to help with applications. The scholarship wasn't a balm for the indignations of the moment, but it was recognition that didn't depend on opinion. It was the concrete answer to the abstract. Yes, you belong at this table. There were other consequences, more complicated. Some students whispered that Whitmore had been robbed of an unfair reputation. Some teachers argued that an administrative leave was a heavy step without full context. Amaya knew that a single thread pulled might not unravel a whole fabric of inequity. She knew that many students, many who could not or would not be seen by cameras, still walked into classrooms whose atmospheres made them smaller, not larger. But she also knew that evidence had made a difference for her. Cameras had not invented truth, but they had made it louder at the exact moment it needed to be heard. At the back of the auditorium, after the assembly, Ms. Rodriguez found her and folded a note into her hand. "Don't let this be the full story of who you are," she said. "Let us help you write the rest." Weeks later, there was a small ceremony. The Scholarship Foundation sent a representative who shook Amaya's hand and asked her what she planned to study. She spoke about applied mathematics and public policy, the awkwardly beautiful place where numbers touched people's lives. The representative smiled and said she wanted to help. Of course, the story did not resolve into tidy, cinematic justice. Ms. Whitmore's reputation was bruised. She would have to answer to a review board. There were whispers about how this would shape her career. That was the fatal mistake the title hinted at, not a bodily harm, but a professional undoing that came from being seen on recorded footage too many times, making decisions that shortchanged certain students. The cameras, Ms. Rodriguez would say in a staff meeting, had recorded a pattern. Patterns have consequences. Amaya's friends were not all the same. Some drifted away, not out of malice, but out of the way people move when the ground beneath a community shifts. Some, closer to her, became allies in the way people become allies. Steady, imperfect, present. Ethan texted an apology that was half truth and half defensive. She answered politely. Claire sent a longer message, a mix of regret and confusion that felt raw, and, Amaya suspected, honest. She spent an afternoon wandering the quad, a book in her lap, but unread. She watched the students moving, some in groups, some alone, and thought about the small, accumulative things that make people believe in their worth. She thought about the long nights of practice. She thought about how easily excellence is disbelieved in people like her unless it arrives with proof. The scholarship would not erase the memory of being humiliated in front of a class. But it gave her a runway. It made certain doors open instead of stay closed. Months later, the school board issued a statement about lessons learned, better oversight of grading, anonymous sampling of tests for audit, explicit training on bias. None of it was sensational. It was the kind of institutional response that matters because it changes structural placeholder points. Ms. Whitmore's leave became an investigation, and the investigation became a narrative that involved lawyers, human resources, and, quietly, a professional reconsideration of how biases are reviewed inside institutions. It was not instantaneous redemption for everyone wronged in the world, but it was concrete steps inside one school. For Amaya, that was enough to be significant. The crumpled test paper that Ms. Whitmore had tossed into a drawer and then later into a trash bin, one of the CCTV clips had shown it, was not in the assembly or the speeches, but a student who worked in the front office, the kind who keeps a memory of paper more than gossip, kept a copy of Amaya's answer sheet for the file the principal had requested. It was stored in a folder labeled Evidence. She visited it on rainy afternoons, like a talisman. Amaya did not parade her victory. There was no triumphant shout. She wrote acceptance letters, filled out forms, met with mentors. She spent more nights at the library, less patting herself on the back, more building a life. Yet sometimes she caught herself smiling, not because she had been proven right, but because the scales had finally shifted a fraction. At the last faculty meeting before holiday break, Principal Tate addressed the room. He did not name the settlement or the specifics. He said only that the school's reputation depended on trust, and trust depended on the work they did every day. He said he hoped the school could be better. When he finished, a teacher across the room, a young woman, approached Amaya to say she had voted to change how tests are reviewed. The small public acts were what would, over time, shape the future of the school. Amaya walked home thinking about the idea of being underestimated. It was an old friend, she realized, always present but not undefeatable. She sat at her desk that night and unfolded a sheet of lined paper. She wrote down a sequence of ideas for college essays. The calculus problem that taught her persistence, the moment of being told she didn't belong, the dignity of answering with work rather than spectacle. A few days later, she stood at the edge of the auditorium one final time as the senior class filed out. Her gaze found the empty desk that had been Ms. Whitmore's. It was a small, ordinary thing. A teacher's name on a door, a chair without someone in it. The chair would likely be filled again. People would continue to make mistakes. The point was not that the system could be perfect, but that it could be held accountable enough to correct itself when bias threaded through decisions. She thought of the title that floated in the back of her mind, the one that advertises love because it promises drama, fatal mistake. She knew its fatality was metaphor. It had not killed anyone. It had instead unraveled a career built on a series of poor judgments and brought to light what had been hidden. Everyone makes mistakes, she would later say in an interview with the school paper, But some mistakes are fatal to a career because they betray the very responsibility teaching demands. As if there was a line she would offer at the end, a sentence that fit better than a headline, it would be this: "He or she who refuses to see excellence in another hands over the proof that shapes their ruin." Ms. Whitmore had thought she could bury the truth with a trashing of paper and a public doubt. She found instead that her own actions had written the evidence of her pattern in frames and timestamps. That was her fatal mistake, not physical harm, not vengeance, but the undoing of professional standing, because the record showed what it showed. In the quiet afterward, Amaya filed her acceptance letter into a neat folder and pinned a small note above her desk. It read simply, "Do the work, let the work speak." She smiled at the sentence the way someone smiles at a map. It showed direction without promising easy roads. If this story landed with you, tell us where you're watching from. Share a place where you've seen small injustices corrected by steady evidence and persistent work. He refused to believe a black student could top the class. She made the fatal mistake of assuming her doubt could stand when every camera frame told the truth. In the end, it wasn't the shout or the spectacle that won. It was quiet dignity, a stack of papers, and footage that would not bend. If you believe excellence should be honored, not dismissed, subscribe and share this story.